The peninsula is like a penis extending from the mainland to an ocean, and its fate is almost determined by where the glance points. Behind the Balkan Peninsula lies the European continent, but unfortunately it points to West Asia. The three major geographical forces, namely the Western European forces led by Germany and France, the Eastern European forces led by Russia, and the Western Asian forces led by Ottoman Turkey, have converged here, resulting in the tragedy of the European gunpowder keg in the Balkan Peninsula. The long-term competition among various forces has divided this small land into 11 countries. On the other end of the Eurasian continent, there is also a small piece of land pointing from the northeast of China to the Japanese archipelago. The narrow and barren territory determines that it is not enough to develop into an independent and powerful geopolitical force. The location of the peninsula determines that it must face the pressure of both land and sea powers. Therefore, the countries on the Korean peninsula have to face a cruel reality that the power of surrounding powers fluctuates, but their own status remains unchanged. The fate of the Korean peninsula forces it to face its boss at all times, while it can only be its lieutenant forever. The Chinese and Japanese had been the boss of the Korean peninsula for 1,100 years respectively, while the Americans have ruled South Korea for 80 years and continue to this day. There is also the constantly hostile Russia from the north, so the South Korea which lies between the four major countries, and the tragedy has long been doomed. On October 15, 2024, North Korea destroyed railways and highways north of the 38th parallel in response to South Korean drones flying into Pyongyang and dropping numerous leaflets. The issue was not just the content of the leaflets, which highlighted facts like how much food Kim Jong-un's Maybach could buy, but also the fact that enemy drones could enter the capital, revealing North Korea's weak air defenses. Despite this weakness, it's naive to think South Korea's defenses are strong. On December 26, 2022, a North Korean drone flew over Seoul for 7 hours, escaping capture despite over 100 attacks, while a South Korean fighter plane crashed due to a technical malfunction, forcing 2 pilots to eject. In response, South Korea shelled territory south of the 38th parallel. Despite differing political systems and economies, both countries showed extreme aggression. After the destruction, North Korea claimed that over 1.4 million young people volunteered or returned to the military. This is a common occurrence, similar to actions in 2023, where signatures expressed willingness rather than genuine determination. Such behavior has happened at least 4 times, evolving from serious initial reactions to becoming more ritualistic over time. Kim Jong-un understands this, as do the North Korean people. At the same time, South Korea has anti-war protests. People fear becoming another Ukraine. It is like a big show, a way to release stress. They know the military control is not in their hands. A war on the Korean peninsula is not just decided by North and South Korea. Also, North Korea has given up on unification. They are slowly removing unification from their constitution. South Korea also gave up on unifying with North Korea. Politicians and people no longer want it. Since 1953, those who lived in a united Korea have died. Family ties are almost gone. They do not like this poor and aggressive relative. Unification is far away. A poor peninsula divided into 2 makes it hard for South Korea to become a big power due to lack of resources and strategic position. For the recent drone incident, South Korea's officials seem to deny it. I guess they dare not admit it, at least not willingly. With the US Federal Reserve cutting rates, China's stock market rising, and US funds leaving, the US is using its usual tactic of creating regional conflicts. Also, with US elections coming, the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East continue. The US is heavily involved in both. Meanwhile, China, America's biggest rival, is developing peacefully in East Asia. This does not fit US interests. They want to shift global attention to East Asia and reduce North Korea's weapon support to Russia. But China responded by holding military drills around Taiwan, surprisingly calming the Korean Peninsula. For China, Taiwan is a core interest. Taiwan is close to China, and reunification is just a matter of time.
For the US, Taiwan used to be a significant card to provoke China, but China has managed to handle it steadily. Right now, the American AI myth relies on high-end chips from Taiwan. If Taiwan Island becomes unstable, TSMC would not be able to produce high-end chips at scale, which instead becomes a weakness for the United States. So in the days following the exercises, the Korean Peninsula has become relatively quiet.
Both the people of North and South Korea understand this well. Peninsula unification is far off and war is nearly impossible. They now serve as armories for Russia and NATO. Most of the weapons they produce are sent to the troubled and nearly shattered land of Ukraine. In April 1592, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who had just unified Japan, ordered Japanese troops to land in Busan, quickly occupying multiple cities in the southern part of the Korean Peninsula, including the capital Seoul. For the next few hundred years, Japan invaded and ruled the Korean Peninsula multiple times until Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, when the Korean Peninsula gained liberation. On March 1, 1919, a large-scale independence movement erupted in Korea, with hundreds of thousands of Koreans taking to the streets demanding independence. Japan carried out a brutal suppression, resulting in thousands of deaths. Those ancestors of South Koreans who shed blood and made sacrifices for national liberation never would have imagined that just 100 years later, on October 9, 2024, South Korea's Ministry of National Defense announced that the Japanese self-defense forces could enter South Korea under specific circumstances and use U.S. military bases in South Korea. I believe this is not the intention of the South Korean government and people, but rather their helplessness. Therefore, I think the steering wheel of this country is not in its own hands. The future is unknown. Whether it leads to prosperity or destruction is just a thought away. But from history, Americans are certainly not a kind and benevolent driver, and Japanese is not a merciful companion either. Today, South Korea has a robust manufacturing and military industry, which is somewhat unexpected given their history. Throughout most of their history, they were often bullied. Modern South Korea's rapid rise to become a developed country is due not only to the chaebol model of the South Korean government and the hard work of the South Korean people, but also to external factors. For example, their first unification was aided by the Tang dynasty. Silla, in alliance with Tang, defeated Bakji in 6060 AD and Goguryeo in 6068 AD, leading to the unification of Korea in 6076 AD. Looking at their history, prosperity seems to be an anomaly and decline appears inevitable. As a frontline and showcase during the Cold War, South Korea was a crucial link between the Asian continent and the Pacific. During the Cold War, South Korea became an important front for the US to contain the USSR and China. Many South Koreans fought and died in the Vietnam War, earning some US aid. In 1986, the US and Japan signed the US-Japan Semiconductor Agreement. The US limited Japan's semiconductor industry and redirected part of it to South Korea and Taiwan, contributing to the success of Samsung and SK Hynix. I will discuss South Korea's economic issues in a separate discussion. To be an enemy of the US is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. The allies of the United States can be divided into two types, disposable and reusable. Disposable allies include Ukraine, South Korea, and Taiwan, while reusable allies include the UK, Israel, and Japan. Disposable allies are used to create internal ethnic conflicts involving Slavs, Koreans, and Chinese, and are primarily meant to drain resources from Russia and China. Reusable allies, on the other hand, have conflicts that are external to their ethnicities, such as the Anglo-Saxons with Germans, the French, Slavs, Jews with Arabs, as well as Japanese and Chinese. Most reusable allies are island nations, aimed at balancing against neighboring continental powers, with Israel effectively being a kind of island. The United States will not personally intervene with disposable allies, only providing support from the background. In contrast, the US will go all out to protect reusable allies, including Israel, which has already won 5 Middle Eastern wars. Due to geopolitical reasons, South Korea's importance is far less than that of Japan. Therefore, I think that at an appropriate time, South Korea will be put on the table just like Ukraine, used to threaten China and Russia's eastern flank, and then sacrificed. As the US military, economic, and political influence wanes in Northeast Asia, the protection it offers South Korea diminishes. North Korea looms like a sword hanging over South Korea, with the 38th parallel acting as South Korea's northern wall. This wall, however, is movable. The northern neighbor's border is only 40 kilometers from Seoul. North Korea possesses long-range rocket artillery systems like the KN-25 and KN-24. The KN-25 has a range of 400 kilometers, covering most of the peninsula, while the KN-24 has a range of 67 kilometers, enough to reach Seoul from the border. According to a news report by MBC on October 3, the South Korean government plans to lower the military meal standards next year, making already inadequate meals even worse. This army, known for bullying internally and fleeing in combat, and which did not win its founding war, raises doubts about its ability to handle future war risks. If the US and China take the risk of engaging in a hot war, the Korean Peninsula would likely become a devastated battlefield again, just like in 1952. Regardless of the outcome, the tragedy would befall the Korean Peninsula. Of course, given the nuclear status of both major powers and the lasting memories of the Korean War for Americans, this risk is small. More likely, if China prevails in the ongoing long-term competition with the US, South Korea would return to its historical position, becoming a subordinate ally to China, focusing on developing certain advantageous industries. If the US wins and China is weakened, with the US dominating globally, it would economically colonize the world, especially countries without military, political, or economic sovereignty. In such a scenario, South Korea's fate would be even more tragic. In conclusion, I believe South Korea has no future, and there will be no war on the Korean Peninsula in the near term.